Welcome to another exciting edition of the Unloose the Goose podcast, where Nicole, Xavier, Sal, and myself today are going to be talking about healthcare and health freedom and natural health and how government always seems to screw it up. And we're going to talk about some solutions and some alternatives to what maybe most people are used to. Super duper important topic. And everyone talks about political freedom, but health freedom is extremely important, not only in the context of your relationship and with your body and how the government interferes with that, but, freedom from chronic fatigue, freedom from addiction, freedom from all sorts of ailments. We can live politically free, but still be feeling sick and having all sorts of issues. And, that's not ideal. So how is everybody doing this evening tonight? What's going on?
Good. How is everyone?
It's been a week.
Yeah.
That it has.
What's
7
everybody
days.
drinking?
What do you got?
I got some hard cider.
All right. That looks good.
Oh,
Same
Sal,
Pellegrino.
in honor of you.
Predictable.
All right. I'm
But I've also got the bourbon rock.
Oh, there you go. Double fisting.
Yeah.
Drinking some kratom. So this is a podcast about agorism and freedom, and we really like to focus a lot on solutions. And none of us on this podcast, and probably chances are if you're listening, are very fond of the government. And boy, has government done a number on healthcare. It's extremely prescient on people's minds right now with all the pandemic. There's an overemphasis and a huge focus on health. Perhaps there should have been more so before. But specifically the role that government plays in this whole phenomenon of public health, right? And they call the people the health authorities for your local jurisdiction. I want to start off by hearing y'all's thoughts on, imagine we are in a free society, no state, no government, different forms of voluntary association, social organization. And there is a pandemic, which does happen, whether it's fabricated, Wuhan lab or whatever. Pandemics have happened in the past. This one's, I guess, pandemic light. But what does that look like for you guys? Specifically, focusing on the law of equal liberty, where like my rights end where yours begin, and we're free to go on living our lives as we see fit, as long as we don't interfere with your equal right to do the same. So let's do a thought experiment. Like we're in a pandemic in a free society. What does that look like? Obviously there's no mask mandate and all that stuff, but what does that look like interacting with the other humans, obligations to stay home? What do y'all think? Why don't we start with you, Sal?
Oh man, well, I'll tell you what, it looks like a society without the government is certainly a lot healthier. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, everything that they put their hands into affects our health. I mean, just think about, for example, everyone's probably thinking that we're going to be discussing the healthcare industry, and we are, but think about just the roads, right? Just their monopolization of roads accounts for how many tens of thousands of deaths every year because of their mismanagement of the transportation system. And the same could be said of every industry, from the, obviously agricultural and food. But to me, in a pandemic, I think that there is no role for the state no matter what. There is no legitimate role for them to play whatsoever. It all comes down to respecting the rights of the individual. That's the best way to cure a pandemic or any sort of, like you said, quote unquote, public health outbreak.
Right on. So freedom's the answer. What's the question?
Exactly, right.
All right. What about you, Xavier?
What about, this is to Sal, I want to follow that up because I get it. There's no role for the state to play. But what about, so this is healthcare, and what about being able to provide actual care? I mean, we've got private hospitals and everybody gets billed, and, the people who can't afford to go to a hospital, who need it because they have the pandemic or whatever flu it might be at the time. What then? Is it just survival of the fittest?
Well, I think in a free society, healthcare would be a lot more affordable, right? The costs of healthcare are driven up by regulatory agencies.
Right.
So in a truly free society, it would be more affordable. We don't have that right now.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that it is unaffordable, but the reason why it's unaffordable is because of the state, right? So, like John said, the solution is more freedom. not more control.
Right, because they have to have malpractice insurance and all of these other things that drives up their prices.
Right, right. I'm not even really concerned about the tort reform, really. My concern, what I think is the primary cause of the cost of healthcare is the Obamacare mandate, right? Especially for young people, because they're being forced to subsidize these healthcare policies for older people who are a much greater draw on the system, right? They require a lot more healthcare resources because they're older and they're getting sick and they're dying and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, yeah.
So the only way to pay for that is by making the young people who don't go to the doctor subsidize all that crap. So that disincentivizes people to have health care. I haven't had health insurance since they passed Obamacare, because I remember I actually tried to sign up for it and they wanted like $373 a month.
It was
I was like
ridiculous.
in my 20s. I'm like, are you crazy? I would never
Yeah.
pay something like that. I don't even, I wouldn't even pay my bills at that point if they were that high.
Yeah. So that was just my follow-up for Sal there, like for clarification. But in terms of what it would look like in a free society, I mean, the mask mandates that are going on now are unconstitutional. Even if we want to say that there is a state and they have any sort of legitimacy, the Constitution, has any sort of legitimacy, then what they're doing now with the mask mandates is completely ridiculous, especially since the virus is less contagious or less deadly than the flu, right? It's literally like bonkers. To have a free society with a pandemic, if I were to paint the ideal picture, it would be like what Sal's talking about in terms of healthcare being way more affordable, and another service, and very, very important, a very important service, but that, within each community, there would be the respected healthcare providers within each, like, what was it, 280 people, before a system becomes a little bit untenable. Within all small communities like that, there would be those healthcare providers whose job it was to look for. Everything would be a lot more decentralized, in my opinion. But there would be no quarantining. There would be no forced quarantining. There would be mass education. Like, hey, everybody, this is exactly what's happening, and you could count on that being the truth and not being a fabricated lie to enslave you further. And people would then be incentivized to make their own decisions. Much like what happened when the outbreak first started happening in the United States. There were no mask mandates. There were no, quarantines and lockdowns. It was like, we suggest, here are the guidelines, and let everybody be free. 15 days to stop the spread kind of thing. And everybody did, you know what I mean?
15 days.
Yeah, like that was like, what, 8 months ago? So, but I initially thought that the American population did an amazing job of actually like distancing and being like, yo, we're just going to pause for a few weeks and just hang out. And like, for the most part, everybody really did that. And I was very proud to be an American at that point. So yeah,
Wow.
Nicole.
All right. Fly the flag. All right. What are your thoughts, Nicole?
I think in a free society, we would have a lot more options than we have right now for providing care to people who cannot afford it, alternative ways of trading for it. And I think anybody or any community in a pandemic would want to work together to minimize its impact. And I think people forget that. That nobody wants to get the bubonic plague and die a horrible death, and they certainly don't want to watch other people get the bubonic plague and die a horrible death. So there's this notion, that survival of the fittest notion, to some extent, yes, but I don't think it's just going to be a big screw you to everybody who can't afford care, because it behooves you and the community to care for people who have something as contagious as a viral infection. And in a pandemic where it's a lot deadlier than the one we're having right now, it is survival of yourself to keep it from taking over, right? Once you figure out how it spreads, you want to do that. I think the question that I would pose, and the thing that where I see tension, is during a pandemic in a free society, you don't have to adhere to the guidelines if nobody's forcing you to. But you also can't force me to do business with you. And so if I decide you wear a mask in my store or in my home, I don't care how that's infringing on your freedoms. You just came into my store, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's been, I mean, on the mask issue, I don't understand why people get so triggered about masks as the thing to fight to the death over, but they do. And my opinion the whole time on masks was, if a private business really wants it, they can say it.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
Private property.
it's private property, and to draw the line in the sand at a private business over that is the wrong way. In fact, I had a long debate with a friend about when Walmart decided they were going to do that, right? Because, it's like, over my dead body, will I put a mask in Walmart, and it's against the Americans with Disabilities Act, and people are going off on all this stuff, and people I know who are liberty based are falling back on regulations that you're like, okay, but do you support that law all the rest of the time? And then, is that really a free society?
Yeah.
Right.
It's important to be consistent through and through. I
So
think
then
one of
the other question I have is, if somebody is that contagious and is that deadly, how much responsibility do they have if they infect and kill 100 other people?
Yeah, it does a lot of the time come down to personal responsibility. And then one of the problems is we can't expect everyone to be 100% personally responsible. And then there's all sorts of different information that people have and different views altogether. And I envision decentralization, like Xavier said. One of the problems is whenever all of the health decisions and the health philosophy is centralized, and it's like a one size fits all top down approach. At least there's competing nation states, and we got to see like Sweden's approach versus China's or the US's, for example. But when I think of a free society, I think of multiple different free societies. If you have like a default template where people can experiment with different forms of social organization or governance, then there's more choice, and different people will flock to different systems. So if it was decentralized, maybe there's like city states or intentional communities or whatever, then the people who I would choose to live with, and this is what we hope to do, are people that are way into natural health. And if a weaker virus or weaker pandemic comes along, then some people will just be like, well, we're going to get it inevitably, or if we get it, we're not really worried about it. Our grandparents are all healthy because we've been this long tradition of natural health. And then there could be another society that has a lower risk threshold because they practice more allopathic or more reactionary type medicine, or maybe because there's more sick people in that culture. So I think if we were to decentralize things, then people could act differently in a health crisis, and that would be okay because we're still doing our thing over there. You're doing your thing. But I would still expect people in my society, if they're sick or if they have something really hardcore like Ebola, to take it upon themselves to isolate or to self-quarantine, right? And other societies could be more strong about that, but it's all to each their own.
Yeah, I wonder if, two things. We're trying to move ostensibly.
Oh, it must have been
We
really good what
lost
he was
him.
about to
Civilization
say,
was, let's
because
say,
his
class one
internet
civilization.
glitched. You're back.
The World Health
So-
Organization got involved for a
Yeah.
second there.
There they
So-
are.
My assumption is that we are trying to move to a class one civilization, right? A global civilization, exploring the stars, that sort of thing. That everything that I'm going to be saying comes from that basis. And I don't know if that's what you all think or feel, but
Is that from something? Is that term from something or some school of thought?
oh yes,
Class
so
one?
class one civilization is basically on the Khartiev scale. Like a class zero civilization is barbaric nation states warring against one another. They haven't, traversed the solar system. Class one, that's the class zero. Class one is, a global government and, transversing the stars and starting to colonize different planets and things. So the assumption here that I have, and it might not be one that everybody has, but that we are trying to move towards a greater state of knowing, civilization, expression of civilization, all of that. And in that kind of a model, what you're talking about with decentralized, different, let's say, categories of healthcare, or even education, or standardization of education, all of that, you have so much potential for disparity, and that's what causes conflict, in my opinion. How do you reconcile that in terms of like we want what's best for everybody. So how are we going to provide healthcare for everybody that's at an equal level, not, some voodoo doctor, destroying a chicken over your Ebola body, right? Like how do you address that besides education?
I think like the only way to do that is to let the market allocate resources. Like the only way to properly know where healthcare resources should go is to allow the market and entrepreneurial behavior to determine that. If we allow, like John was saying, this sort of centralized top-down management, it can only distort the market. So like when the state tries to do some sort of, they have some good idea that they have to enforce by at the point of a gun. It's such a good idea. They have to
Can't be a good idea.
Gun in your face to do it. They only distort what the market would naturally, the natural allocation of resources.
Yeah, I get to answer the the voodoo doctor kind of thing. I guess you're operating for the assumption that we want to have a homogenous form of social organization for the whole globe, or
I don't know about that.
is that
It's like, how do we get to a planetary peace without some sort of like agreed upon set of rules?
Imagine
The
like,
rule is leave us alone. We could probably get there.
right.
I mean, is there a basic standard of care that everybody gets all the time? There should be, but should it be forced? I don't see how that can work.
I agree.
I think like if we really let the market take hold, I think we would have things like we have like an Uber for knee surgeons, right? Like we would have like these sort of like experts develop on very like specific niches in healthcare.
Yeah.
Especially if it was like deregulated. One of the biggest problems in healthcare is licensing, and the American Medical Association, because by requiring healthcare licenses, what they do is they restrict the supply of doctors, and that just drives up the cost. And it's really just a cartel, right? This is just exactly like the Federal Reserve is to banks, as the American Medical Association is to doctors. It's the same exact structure, and it's the same, of course, the same negative consequences. And most people, when you tell them that, they're like, "Oh well, how am I going to know that my doctor isn't some crazy guy who's just off the street or something like that?" Well, the point is, like the market, this person would be out of business. They wouldn't be a doctor in a free market because no one would be going to them.
Well, what about the snake oil salesmen of the early 1900s? Like we have the potential now for all the information to be disseminated quickly, so that could negate that. But like the reason the
As a
FDA and all that happened,
consumer, there is a certain amount of responsibility in figuring out if something's good or not, and that is true in today's healthcare system now.
Oh,
like how many of us have had bad experiences or poor care, right? There is an urgent care here that I will not go to now, unless I'm desperate, because they're terrible. I drive 20 minutes more to the one that works, and I had to figure that out. Snake oil salesmen will exist in the society, but as your reputation gets out there, I think people realize it.
Yeah, and one person's snake oil is another person's essential oils.
Kratom.
And like Kratom or CBD. I've actually, people have said that I sell snake oil. They're like haters and don't even really understand what it is.
What do they know?
It's hard to oil a snake, right, AutoFab?
But even the voodoo thing, like who am I to say that that's not a proper healthcare, right, or proper care? And maybe there's something there, like you could talk about Jesus Christ as a voodoo kind of healer in one context, and of course he was using essential oils, and it was probably like some Eastern, this was before Eastern, I guess. Well, I guess maybe it predated Jesus, some of those Eastern remedies, but there was something to that. And then maybe there is a spiritual component as well, like mind over matter. We are all energy. And obviously if you're in a negative, scary place and you're focused on the cancer or whatever's going on, you're not as going to have a good a time as if you're feeling positive. People are praying for you. You're seeing your family and stuff. So I think the thing with healthcare is it's something that I kind of am just like, I want to honor your right to do whatever, experiment with whatever, because I do some weird stuff, like MMS. I don't know if anybody knows about MMS. It's not very far off chemically from bleach, although it's not bleach, but that's what the opponents will say. And it really helps to kill pathogens in your body and not harm the good cells in your body, like antibiotics, for example. But people are put in a cage for that, So it's one of those things where I would hope other human beings would be civilized enough to give me that equal respect, because I want to give it to them. But people are brainwashed. people are indoctrinated, even the authority. We've talked a lot about how people just kind of give up authority in different areas, school,
Yeah.
religion, medical, especially. And that whole establishment, not only is it licenses, but they're all licensed in the same school of thought, which is an
Yeah.
allopathic reactionary type medicine. So I'd like to do things that we can do to kind of just opt out of that and at least be protected in doing our crazy snake oil stuff.
I mean, at one point, all new medicine was snake oil in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Like, imagine the first guy who's like developing penicillin. They're like, "What are you doing playing with fungus?" Like
I'm
that
eating
ends
mold.
up
What a
being
weirdo.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
What about, how far are you guys on your journey to natural health, or you guys have any special diets you go along with, avoiding GMOs and stuff? And then whenever there is some sickness, are y'all into colloidal silver, or like, what's that world like for y'all?
Well, I have used MMS. I found it to be really extraordinary. I have not had to go to a doctor for as long as I can remember. Unless I had like surgery on my knee because a pencil got stuck in it a long time ago when I was a kid. But
It's a hardcore studying session there.
dude, yeah,
Man.
I generally like take really good care of myself, and I eat less than what the FDA says, for instance. Like,
The food pyramid.
yeah, F that. I eat about 1,000 calories, maybe 1,200 a day. I don't really keep track of it. And that gives the cells time to actually regenerate themselves. So if they're not constantly taking new information, they actually last longer. It's been proven in a bunch of different studies. So yeah, I do a lot of herbs. My wife is an herbalist, so we have like a great pantry of herbs for all kinds of different things. And just generally eat food as medicine,
Food is, you are what you eat.
Yeah, I've basically the same story. I've tried all the different health, the sort of natural stuff. I just try to like eat right and take care of myself. I go to the doctor like once a year for like a checkup, and I've thank God, knock wood, I've been all right ever since. So
That's awesome. I just don't go. I like, unless I'm dying, don't take me to a hospital. Don't take me to a doctor. Don't take me to anybody, because more often than not, not that I know more than them, but like I ask them a lot of tough questions and they're challenging.
They're like, oh, you've been researching Google, haven't you, son?
Right.
Duck, duck, go. What about you, Nicole? You got any Tennessee backwoods remedies?
I have an increasing number of them the longer I live here. So I recently was invited by somebody to learn what she calls old world remedies, and I haven't gone to her house yet, but I'm excited to do that because it's some of the same wild plants that I forage on a regular basis. So if anybody listens to my podcast, I do a featured forage every week, and it's usually something that I'm finding in Tennessee right now. And in this area, which since Xavier likes to go to North Carolina sometimes, similar abundance of herbal remedies just kind of grow. And then you can go collect them and dry them or turn them into tinctures. And since moving here, I've learned more and more and more about natural remedies. I put Western medicine in a place, though. I will use it. Like, I do get my female cancer screening every year. And, I don't know what I would do if I was diagnosed with cancer, if I would go into traditional Western solutions or I'd probably dive pretty deeply into herbal remedies. If I'm inflamed, I have turmeric that I take. So there's all of these different herbal remedies I'll take. And then to just echo what Sal and Xavier say, how you treat your body and your mind is so important about your health. And I haven't always treated myself well. So now I treat myself well. Like this whole week, last 2 weeks have been crazy for me. And at some point during the day, I just say, screw it. I'm going for a walk by myself. I'm turning my phone off. I don't care what dies right now.
Right.
Because I need that moment to reset. And I think it's one part what you put in your body from a nourishment standpoint, and also what you put in your body spiritually and mentally makes a huge difference in how you do health-wise.
I think also it's really important to eat genetically, meaning if you know what your people have eaten throughout time, like whatever, if you're Scottish and this, like I'm part Swiss, part Mediterranean, part Brazilian, like I've got a bunch of different things, but my diet, somebody asked on YouTube, what do you eat? And I eat a lot of meat and cheese and bread. And then I also eat a lot of greens, and like tabbouleh, parsley, nutrient dense food. So the stuff you get at the grocery store is not as nutrient dense as what grows on your farm, right, Nicole? Like
Yeah.
and like better wild stuff, even more so than agriculture, like nettles. Like nettles grow and we don't have to do anything, and they're super nutrient dense. So, and I'll drink nettle tea often here, and that sort of thing.
Vitamin D in those.
Yep. And the other question that we got on YouTube was, what do the agorists, or what do the geese, what do they see about a black gray market solutions to healthcare? And that's from Nicholas Covey.
I've got a good one. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with, you might know this, Docodemic, right? It's a medical token. And I think it's only available right now for people for Americans in Florida, but it's available widely in Latin America. Essentially, the idea is that your healthcare data, you own it, right? Rather than like Mark Zuckerberg or Jack at Twitter owning your private data,
Right.
you take your healthcare data, you allow Docodemic to give it to university researchers and doctors and whatnot. And in return for that data, they give you free healthcare services. So you have once a month, you could do telemedicine appointments for free with doctors. And there's a whole list of benefits available, but that's just one example of, go ahead.
Can you spell that?
Yeah. It's DOCADEMIC. I think it's just called Doke token is the name of the cryptocurrency that they use.
Okay.
So that's just one example of like a gray market solution. But there's also a lot of these, like John was talking about, a lot of these herbal remedies. I think maybe he can expand on this. Are pretty good gray market solutions to some of the sort of backwoods government programs. The third thing, real quick, is like look at, for example, the movie Dallas Buyers Club. That's a great example of gray market smuggling to get around FDA regulations to save thousands or hundreds of people's lives, or at least make them better.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think I think it could be, well, Konkin had this really broad definition of counter economics, or maybe it was agorism, and it was like anything that's against the state, basically, which is pretty general. So in a sense, if you have this statist medicine, which would be those medicines approved by the FDA, big pharma, this whole medical, congressional, industrial complex apparatus, then anything that's not that would be counter economic or would be agorist. And so anytime that you can help your body to heal itself through alternative remedies, through natural alternatives, I think that could be, that's against the state, because the state wants people to be sick. The state wants people to be weak, and the state and their cronies with the revolving door, they want to make money off of people that are sick and caught in that paradigm. And I have the privilege of, I don't know if it's a privilege, I have the right to do this, but whatever. My business, Brave Botanicals, I sell kratom, and I really appreciate it because it helps a whole lot of people with a whole variety of ailments, but it's also very anti-state. It's illegal in 6 different states, although it's just the powderized leaf of a tree. The FDA tried to get the DEA to ban it federally, adding it to Schedule 1 along with LSD and cannabis.
I remember that.
Back in 2016, they failed. There was massive pushback. And now the FDA is pushing out so much propaganda, and they put out these little dinky press releases. They do the same thing where there's like a COVID death, and it's someone that died from a motorcycle accident, but they had COVID. They were COVID positive. Well, they have kratom related deaths where someone got shot and they had kratom in their system. Someone died with heroin and fentanyl, and they had kratom, and it's a kratom related death. But, it does feel good to offer that to people. And I think focusing on that, colloidal silver, MMS is radically anti-state. There's all these alternatives that are anti-state in themselves. And then getting out of health insurance. So I do a health share. We talked about it on previous shows. I think there's some interest from some of the audience. It's called Zion Health Share. Most of the health shares are Christian based, and they make you like vow that you go to church and that you're Christian and stuff, which, I mean, it wouldn't be a very Christian thing to do, but you could just mislead them. But I didn't want to do that, and I wanted to find a really solid one. So it's called Zion Health Share, and I pay like $207 a month. And the way that it works is if there's a catastrophic accident that's, an emergency, I have to pay up to $1,000, and everything else is covered by the network. It's perfect for me because I never go to the doctor. I don't have any prescriptions or anything. And so, but I am covered, like if there's a car accident or a broken bone or a genuine need for that. And so one of the things that I want to do with the Freedom Cell Network is once we reach a good enough size for us to create our own health share. Now, it could be totally agorist and a voluntary thing. Maybe we tokenize it or something. Although it could just be a business that is kind of like a satellite, an actually legal entity. I don't know what that's going to look like, but there's no reason why our Liberty community and the Gaggle of geese and the agorists and stuff can't have our own type of health share program, which would
Good idea.
be anti-state for sure, to get out of
Actually,
that system.
what one of the things that we wanted to put in fire on that I was looking into heavily for the past 2 years was a privatized cooperative healthcare, like where you you get your prescriptions at a lot less. There's another bit to the black market, gray market for healthcare, and that is medical tourism, right? You can go to another country, the flight, the hotel, all of even some travel. If you have like a dental problem, if you go to Mexico, it still costs less than what you would have to pay here in the States, right? Because of the healthcare system. So there's that and people go to Thailand. There's a number of different places where you can get a whole vacation plus your medical care for like half the price of what you pay here. So that's a black gray market, and that's because of the decentralization of nations. So that's cool. In regards to the privatized like group cooperative healthcare, there are a number of solutions. I'm glad you put Zion Healthcare or Health Share. Oh, and I don't know if you said this, but big shout out to all of the folks who are helping us get the links for all the cool things that we're talking about and putting them up in the show notes for us. Thank you for that. So yeah, I think that like we were looking into doing this membership where you pay a certain amount a month and you get access to discounted drugs from, Canada or Mexico. And because it's a cooperative and because you're paying for it in like your membership fees, we can get those drugs at a huge discount. I don't know how that's changing now with Trump doing the whole like drug reform, but that's also something to look into. There are healthcare providers who are like family health doctors, and you can join them and pay them a month, and they'll be your healthcare provider. We were part of that in Asheville, North Carolina for a while.
Yeah, that's called concierge medicine, where you pay a subscription to the doctor.
Yep.
So if you're Googling it in your area, look for a concierge provider.
Oh,
and then direct care is another term to use for finding. These are doctors. This is great. This concept, direct care. It's not a black or a gray market. It's perfectly legal.
Mm-hmm.
Get this. Okay, so you go to the doctor and they do something. And then when you leave, you know what you do? Pay the doctor.
No third parties.
That is the latest in healthcare ingenuity for health freedom.
Right.
Innovation.
And I've always, so I'm always amused by it because that's the way it used to work. Right. And then we mucked it all up with insurance and mandates and all this other stuff. And at the end of the day, the solution to making things easier and to bring costs down is direct care.
Yeah. It's like when the government takes too much control and screws things up so much, they almost force the innovation and all the alternatives. I have another agorist approach. My naturopath, he was a chiropractor. And so he had a legal medical license so he could practice medicine, right? But then he started, I don't know at the same time, but he started doing all sorts of alternative stuff, like some pretty hardcore stuff, a lot of energy medicine, kinesiology, and all sorts of cool stuff. And this wasn't accepted with the modern licensing establishment. So he started experimenting with working with an Indian reservation that would give out the health license. So it's protected under their federal rights that they have. And then that didn't go far enough. So he joined this Pastoral Medicine Association where he's practicing medicine as an ordained pastor, which gives him First Amendment protection. So at the end of the day, he's pushing back so much and like he doesn't pay his taxes and stuff. He's a pretty cool rebel agorist, and they took away the original license, but it didn't change anything for the guy, He also got blasted by some folks for not wearing a mask and trying to go to this canoe place in Austin, and people freaked out because they didn't want to wear a mask to rent a canoe.
Right.
And I was defending them, and they're like, that guy doesn't even have a license, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, I have benefited immensely from this gentleman, license or not. We don't need your stinking badges. So there's always opportunity out there. The state forces all the opportunity.
I know somebody who, two different groups actually, two different individuals. One has found, now get this is crazy, but it evidently works. Curing cancer with essential oils injected directly into the bloodstream. Now
YouTube's banning us right there.
Dude.
In the feed.
I'm just saying, I know somebody who did that, and it was working, and it was curing like stage 4 cancers.
Wow.
I do not recommend this. Do not go injecting yourself with.
Don't put peppermint in your blood right now.
Right,
or
right.
disinfectant.
Yeah, no, or disinfectant or bleach or
lights.
anything. But they actually, and I might not be speaking to it correctly, but they used some sort of essential oil to do this, and not like your, whatever Datura or whatever the brand is. doTERRA, thank you. But they and the way they had to do it was they had to become a church, and they legally were able to do this very quietly, and they can't advertise it or whatever. And then the other was somebody who was providing vitamin C, but I think it was colloidal vitamin C or liposomal vitamin C, right? Like you can go get emergency packets or vitamin C over the counter, but it's like citric acid. It's not real, bodily available, bioavailable vitamin C. And this person creates their own, and you have to join a membership, and they actually vet you. They'll do background checks on you and all of this stuff because it's super private, and they could totally get into trouble for it. And they're able to provide liposomal vitamin C in a private club, basically, where you have to join the club and attest to the fact that you are of sound mind and body and all of this, and making your own choices as a human being. So there are ways around all of the state in terms of healthcare, and many of them are legal and many of them are gray, right, areas. So
yeah, another gray approach is not to frame it as a cure.
C word.
That's the thing.
Right.
So there are so many ways to help people medically without saying you're helping people medically.
yeah.
And so so I'm never sure what line on the podcast to go over for things like something as simple as mullein tea, which helps with colds and respiratory problems and asthma and all of these other things. I can't say it cures those, or I can't say it helps with those, or like the language around it is and framing seems to make a bigger difference about if the hammer comes down. Because when we're talking about gray solutions or gray market solutions, we're pretty much talking about I don't want to be noticed. I don't want to be noticed enough that the FDA comes in with their guns and smashes all my jars of tea.
Right.
Basically.
It's a fine line.
Which sounds absurd, but it's not. It is not absurd. And so that goes beyond just the herbal approach into people finding prescriptions on accident and stuff like that.
Yeah, like elderberries are a great antiviral, and they're sold as an antiviral, and it's like $50 for a little bottle like this, and if you know what they look like, it's really easy to go harvest them, put them down into a tea and add some honey, and boom, you've got the same thing that you could buy on a shelf for $50.
And that is shipped over state lines as a remedy, which is great.
Lock them up.
Yeah.
Y'all are criminals.
So
Exactly.
It's education, right? It's accessing education, thinking critically, thinking for yourself, trusting in your intuition, not worrying about what the rest of the herd thinks, but being able to educate yourself and find the right kind of solutions, right?
Yeah, listening to your body is critical. You got something, Sally? You're about to say something?
I was just going to say, I think like when we talked about like what are some Agora solutions, right? We're just talking about voluntary exchange. So find a medical professional that you like, that whose values coincide with yours, that you trust, who you think is a smart person, and trade with them. And that's what I do. I just I use one primary care physician who I really trust, and I think we're on the same page. And I'm not an expert, right? So when I take my car to the mechanic, it's because I don't know how to fix it. It's the same thing with the human body. If there's something wrong, I go to a professional.
Right.
So.
Right on. I think so I try to avoid the doctor like the plague, and only when it's like super duper severe. for example, I had tooth problems for the longest time, really bad tooth infection. And I created this C word for it, for the dental carie. It was colloidal silver, activated charcoal, xylitol, and then bentonite clay, activated charcoal, xylitol, and then you use colloidal silver to turn it into a thick paste. And you pack it on, pack it on, pack it on. Literally for like 3 or 4 years, this was a tooth I got a root canal on. It would bother me. Then I got a root canal. I didn't want to do the root canal because my ex-wife, her mom had major nerve damage from a root canal. But even when I got the root canal, it still continued to bother me. So this tooth pack would work. But until the tooth pack didn't work, and it got so bad that my jaw was like completely swollen, totally problematic. I had to have emergency surgery. So I think there is a place for the medical doctor, the MD, the allopathic, for emergencies especially, or for checkups if you want to get your advice from the MD. But there's also there's been a de-emphasis on the natural health and the Eastern school of thought, and the idea that when our body is given the proper nutrients and avoiding toxins, the body can miraculously heal itself. Maybe it's not a miracle at all. A lot of people don't know the history of that. It was actually the pesky Rockefeller Foundation, who are like at the nexus of all this hardcore tyranny and growth of evil government. They funded medical schools and started adding the allopathic Western medicine branch, and slowly started minimizing the influence of the Eastern natural school of thought and the nutrition even. And they had a big role in shifting that in large part. They had a big role in big pharma becoming a big thing. And now fast forward, here we are today, where traditional medicine, it's kind of like conventional food is the food that has the chemicals and stuff,
Right.
And so we're like seen as weirdos for doing the stuff that's been done for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But I think people just need to know what's out there and try to become your own authority and to listen to your body.
Weston A. Price did a whole book on proper nutrition, and he went to go prove essentially that our Western diet was better than the old diets of the around the world. And he went proving that the people of Africa and Australia, that they probably had horrible dental problems and everything. And it turned out they didn't. Turns out that they were eating raw meats and like really nutrient dense stuff, and their teeth were amazing, their gums were amazing, they had no dental problems when they were older, and they had square jaws and all of this stuff. And so he basically put out this book about how to eat nutrient dense food, and a lot of food clubs started springing up where they had raw milk, and then they had the FDA or whoever running in with guns and raiding them. We talked about that a couple episodes ago. And the thing there is, again, back to the nutrient dense stuff and some of the old school ways of doing things. This is why I say eat to your genetics, because it's what your body's most used to. And having that nutrient dense stuff seems so weird now, but that's like how it's been done for thousands of years, right?
Yes, and when it comes from your land, you eat less of it.
Right.
That's the other thing is, like, I know from when I was traveling, I was probably now 30 pounds heavier when I was on the road all the time, because I was buying food at the grocery store.
Right.
And I know that sounds psycho, and now I grow a lot of food, or I get it from nearby, and it just hasn't been out and traveling very long, and I'm just not that hungry anymore. I think a key component of handling health, though, from an agorist standpoint, is if you don't need it, then you don't have a problem. And so there's almost like this desperate drive to stay healthy just so you can stay out of there, right?
Yeah. It's a terrible system. And then there's like social service workers when you bring your kids somewhere, and they're like, why haven't you done this? And vaccinations and all sorts of stuff.
I mean, I am ready to leave this country if I can, if anything major goes wrong, not just because it's cheaper in another country. They're treating you better there now.
The thing about other countries, we say America is the freest country in the world, and it's like, nah, yes and no. In a place like, let's say, Uruguay, right? The technocracy there is not as widespread as it is in the United States, and the infiltration of the state is not as widespread because there's no impetus for it. There's no like, let's try to control it, because everybody's like, fucking do whatever, right? And so like the laws might be more impactful or authoritarian, but the people enforcing them just don't. It's like, who cares, right? It's like, if you're not hurting anybody. So there, in a lot of old world countries or whatever, there's still a lot of that sort of like, if it's not bothering anybody, like, why are we gonna, bust somebody's ass for this? Whereas I think here in the Western world, where you've got so much social media, so much media in general, like fucking with people's heads, it's almost like it's more dystopian in a supposedly free society.
And that's what makes it so ironic, just to tie that point back to what John was saying about, isn't it funny how people look at like us as we're crazy, as agorists, as we're crazy for preferring natural health solutions, when they're the crazy ones for trusting politicians to have any control over their healthcare.
Right.
These are the same people who dropped a nuclear bomb. They've committed genocides multiple
Atrocity.
times.
Yeah.
They don't
Those
care
are the
about
ones who, like, what kind of conspiracy theorist are you to think that they should be in charge of your healthcare? That's crazy.
And is anybody else like astounded that people still don't get it after the COVID theater of the last like 5 months?
Well, didn't the WHO just come out and say, "Oh, surprise! Diet and exercise does sort of help."
Yeah,
Dude,
and vitamin D does.
yeah, I'll
Vitamin
give
D,
you one
vitamin
more.
B.
The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, said only 9,610 people died from COVID alone. 9,000, and people are wearing masks like it's a fucking religion. And I'm scared. I'm scared walking around society, being like, "Hey, can I have a conversation with you about this? Like, before you impose this ridiculous bullshit." And it boggles my mind that people actually believe it, and they're giving the president, whatever you think about the orange Cheeto or not, he's like, they're giving him grief about, like, you didn't take this seriously enough. And it's like, but he did. And we did all this stuff together as a country. We agreed to do this shit together, and we did. And like the death rate's nothing now, like almost literally nothing. And people are still like social distancing. There's still signs on the floor. People are acting weird. It's like, come on.
And most of those deaths, especially in terms of coronavirus, I mean, what was it, like 40 to 50% of the deaths surrounding coronavirus came from Phil Murphy, Andrew Cuomo, and like
Yeah.
Tom Wolf, Newsom, and then I think Whitmer. Those 5 governors who
Yep.
all forced old people who had coronavirus into nursing homes.
Yep.
That was like most of the deaths right there. So it all came from
The COVID butcher. Somebody's calling Cuomo the COVID butcher.
Yeah. I call him the butcher of Broome County because they had so many deaths up there.
Dude.
There was a study that saw millennials out of any other group have the greatest misperception of the risk for themselves and for other groups. And they had no idea that a significant proportion of the deaths are from very older folks.
Yeah.
I want to point out, it's not just older folks. Somebody got on to me early on in the pandemic when I was like, we need to be concerned about older folks. And this guy was like, hey, buddy, it ain't just age. I'm old and I'm very healthy. So I think that's something that's really important. And I hope more people can put things in perspective, because the evidence does show, like, I don't think it's a hoax or it's completely fake, right? I do think that there is a virus out there, whether it's man-made or not, and it's just not as harmful as the government or as the media wanted people to believe. But one thing that is clear is if you're very unhealthy, or if you have all these pre-existing conditions, a lot of them in large part are preventable through good health and good diet, right? Then you're going to fare so much better if you come into contact with the virus. And that's a big takeaway that I hope people are going to pay attention to. I've seen that in business and natural health industry. So I think people are more conscious of it, at least. That's a big takeaway.
Yeah,
Am I
I
right?
think, yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. I don't know. I don't know. To me, it's sort of crazy. Like, if you are concerned about a pandemic, or you're concerned about somebody not having a vaccine or anything like that, you are free to stay indoors. You're free to close your business and stay home. No one told you had to come socialize with the rest of us.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just, if I'm not afraid, then that's on me. So you have no right to impose your health decisions on me. You can't tell me I have to muzzle myself.
Right.
Unless, like Nicole said, I'm in your house or I'm in your property or something like that. That, of course, would be the one exception. You only have control over your own body.
How does that go for you for vaccines, right? Like, if you get a vaccine, doesn't that make you immune to something? So why would you be afraid of somebody who hasn't gotten a vaccine? They're the ones that should be afraid by that logic, right?
I have a friend here in New York who's like some big shot doctor at one of these hospitals, and she makes all kinds of money. And I said that to her, and she's like, "Well, what about little kids? What?" Because she's, all these New York liberals over here.
Yeah.
She's like, "What about little kids?" I'm like, "Well, that's on the parents, right? Like, if that's on you, like to do your research and to know what the proper course of action is."
And little kids are barely even getting sick from it. They had to invent this like inflammatory syndrome when they realized people weren't really concerned for their kids because no one's getting sick. So everyone always calls people selfish if they don't want to wear a mask, right? And I participated in this. Yeah, they do. That's the thing.
Also, if you don't get a vaccine,
and if
because
you
I
don't
haven't ever
social
had a flu
distance,
shot, and I'm selfish.
yeah, and if you continue to go to events or to spend time with people outside of your pod.
Wow.
I went to this protest, and it's crazy that this is a protest these days. It's peak 2020, but we went to a watering hole in Austin, Texas. It was actually Alex Jones that encouraged a whole lot of people to go. Love him or hate him, I'm not a big fan, but I thought this was cool when he was getting involved locally, pushing back. And so you're required to wear masks when you're at this outdoor swimming area. And then the city closed off these hike and bike trails, and you have to have a reservation and you have to social distance and stuff. So Jones stormed it down. I shared this like live video. It was like 3.5 minutes showing the cool scene. Yeah, it was really cool and beautiful. And it was a lot of Trump. Most of the people were all Trumped out, but it was still a cool scene. And I appreciated the non-cooperation. And so, man, it ended up going super viral, got way more views than my normal Facebook Live videos. And a good chunk of it was people that were inspired, supportive, hoorah, it's good to see this. But there was a lot of people, because some other people shared it and like, these are super spreaders. And they were on there extremely hateful, hoping that I get COVID and deny me medical access. And in 2 weeks, there's going to be a huge surge from this. And you're selfish. And I'd like to flip that around. It's not selfish to go about your life, to have personal responsibility of your own health. What's selfish is to expect everyone else to stoop down to your level of fear or your level of risk, right? And Sal was saying, you can stay home, you can shield this, you can shift that, but to expect everyone else to. But then the question comes down to, what if it was like a 1918 Spanish flu?
Well, everybody would effing know. I mean, if it were a real fucking pandemic, there would be fucking evidence everywhere.
Yeah.
Like there would be people dying in the streets and hospitals overflowing. Like, what?
Remember in the beginning, they were showing us pictures.
Sorry.
Remember in the beginning in Hong Kong, people were dropping dead in the street. Where are they? Why isn't that happening? I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Right.
That never happened anywhere else. That was some good propaganda right there.
It could have been. I mean, that's what a communist nation does the best, propaganda.
Yeah.
Well, and there is a reason that we all stayed home for 2 weeks, because it worked.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like I even posted on Instagram.
I stayed home for 6 weeks.
Yeah, seriously, we were up in the mountains. We're like, F this, if it, I was not afraid of the virus because we have elderberry, we have all these things that we do to take care of ourselves. I was afraid of like how people were going to respond, because it was scary to watch those videos in China. And it was scary like to the rest of the world when like Iran, like everybody was dying there. And then Italy, like I have friends.
Mass graves and stuff.
Yeah, it was serious in Italy. Like it was a real deal. And their hospitals were overwhelmed and all of this stuff. But like when it came here, everybody just stayed at home by like, we're Americans and we're going to get together and do this together. And like, we're going to get together and stay apart, like, and they did. And I was like, wow. And then, then there hasn't been.
There hasn't at all. There's been no, whatever he was about to say. There, you cut off as there hasn't been any, and then you went into no
real evidence. I mean, people have gone into hospitals and filmed, and there's like emptiness, and it's like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, somebody's making a bunch of money on these big conversions of football stadiums, and they converted the convention center here in Travis County for overflow. Never had to use it whatsoever. Kept moving the goalposts. Like originally it was to slow the spread, right? And it's like, okay, the spread slowed, and then it was like, well, we got to make sure we don't overwhelm the hospitals because that's going to have all sorts of indirect consequences.
Right.
Like, okay, some places kind of peaked up there. Most places stayed at normal capacity, which they said it was like, we're at 80% capacity in these hospitals. I went and did research. 80% capacity is the norm. And it's private hospitals, they want to have high capacity like a hotel, Right. And then they're like, well, we need to make sure that the infection rate's a certain percentage. And then we got school coming up soon, so we got to stay closed for that.
They always just report positive case tests, right?
Yeah. More tests.
So then it comes out they're testing up your nose
positives.
and in your mouth, and that's 2 positive tests.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And then you don't know how many tests, they just say the number of tests of positive results, not how many total tests were given. Like the whole data manipulation of this should have people pissed off and screaming about it. And that's what I find frustrating. Nobody's questioning anything.
Well,
There's a
because
lot
they
of
say
people
you're a
that are.
sociopath if you don't wear a mask, and it's like, how? Like, how can you mislabel people who are thinking logically and could help everybody wake up and get out of the fear that they're in, if you're going to like label them as some sort of terrible thing? It's like, thank God I am a sociopath and don't care what anybody thinks of me. But-
I haven't worn the mask once. Actually, that's not
Nice.
true. I take my cat to the vet and he was like dying, so I had to like put the mask on. But I got out of that halfway through it. But that was the only time I've worn it. And I'm like I said, I'm like 10 minutes from New York City, so people look at me like I am like Satan around here.
Devil.
I've had the cops come. They've called the cops on me like 2 or 3 times. Like, it's insane.
Hey man, Halloween's coming. You can get like little horns and just wear them around.
That'd be
I know.
perfect.
It's crazy. But they had a hospital ship, like one of those. We have like the U.S. has 2 hospital ships. One of them
Yep.
was in port here. They took the Jacob Javits Center and they had the Army Corps of Engineers turn it into like a makeshift hospital. And I think the entire time they saw like less than 20 patients between the 2 of them.
Yeah.
So it's just a giant waste of taxpayer money that's being doled out to probably whoever is the highest donor to, Mitch
Yeah.
McConnell or Chuck Schumer or one of these other snakes. And that's really what it all comes down to.
It's a huge fraud.
It
People
is.
are waking up to it, and I do think that they overstepped their bounds and kind of overplayed their hand on this one. And a lot of people that, just like after 9/11, a lot of people were like, whoa, I'm going to turn into a conspiracy researcher. And then after the bailouts, that got a lot of people active and involved.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are like, this is a little bit too fishy, and the lockdowns and the business and losing my savings, not being able to visit my dying grandparent, for example, or something like that,
Seriously.
just tearing families apart. And, the masses. So when we look at the media or we go to the grocery store, we are examining the masses. And I've said on previous podcasts, it's never the masses that change the course of history. So I try not to allow the behavior of the masses and how, automaton they are to get me feeling pessimistic. Because if we can offer a better alternative, and when it comes to natural health, that's us just radiating healthy, positive vibes, eating well, exercising, having good, happy community, right? Healthy children. People are hopefully going to be like, what's going on over there? But the problem is the propaganda and the us versus them and the fear stuff has gotten so sophisticated that even the healthy family with the unvaccinated kids that are like always glowing and healthy, never go to the doctor, somehow they're the bad guys. And like, we need to stay, you can't come play with my children, your kids aren't vaccinated. I had somebody tell me that before. It's like, but I thought the vaccine worked, so you shouldn't be worried about my kids. Not to mention my kids are never freaking sick, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But it's
I just realized you sound like Matthew McConaughey. If I were to close my eyes, like listening to you talk, you have that like smooth Southern drawl like Matthew.
All right.
Yeah.
He's here in Austin.
Yeah.
That is a good movie, Dallas Buyers Club, and it's a great example of gray markets. I want to point out real quick the MMS. We were talking about the MMS before, and we talked about how my doctor and Xavier, you were talking about this like religious exemption kind of deal and how people utilize that. These guys selling MMS, which is chlorine dioxide. It's used in an industrial application as a big cleaner for like hospital equipment and big industrial equipment. And this guy, Jim Humble, discovered in his trips to Africa that it actually he said that it cures malaria.
Yeah.
And so he started giving it to people and studying it, and come to find out it kills all these other pathogens, viruses, bacteria. It doesn't really harm the good cells. And I can attest to it. Xavier can attest to it. Well, the FDA really does not like it because it's out there drinking. It actually smells like pool water. It smells like bleach when you drink it. You dilute it hardcore. I'm not telling you how to take it. You got to do a lot of research before you start taking it. But this guy, they started the Genesis 2 church.
Yep.
And that's how they sell it. And whenever COVID popped off,
Sacrament.
these guys are not stealthy agorists like Sal down there. Although I don't know how stealthy Sal is on this podcast and his podcast, right? But these guys were like, this stuff cures COVID-19, writing articles, doing videos, and the father-son duo is in prison now because of it. That they cracked down and they came and finally silenced them. They thought that the church would offer protection. But the cool thing is they have like mirror churches and other chapters of the church. But at the end of the day, the recipe for making your own chlorine dioxide, you just go to like a hardware store, whatever, you can get the ingredients. People can make it on their own. So just a beautiful thing that we have this anti-state remedy that many people get help with, and they try to shut it down. But just like, you know, Monero or cryptocurrency, you can't shut it down. It's already out there.
Yeah. And once the information's out there for the smart people. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole. I got something.
Okay. I was gonna say, I just think it's interesting as we talk about things, we keep coming back to church.
Yeah.
The idea of a food church or a healthcare church. And that's kind of how the health shares get exempt from some of the regulations that have harmed our healthcare system under the Affordable Care Act. I wonder at what point we can talk about what that looks like, because that concept of becoming an agorist church is one that we could play with and have a lot of fun with, but it does not
all hail
protect us. It does not protect us from everything, because, you know, just because you are a church doesn't mean you're going to be above the law. And it's hard to figure out where those lines are as you start going down that road.
So there's an interesting mineral out there called quinine. It's in tonic water, gin and tonic, right? And they found that basically that drug that nobody likes to tout anymore, even though it works, and the people who produce the most of it in the United States were killed mysteriously in their house, hydroxychloroquine, that has been, it's proven to work for arthritis. It's proven to work for, I know people who take it for arthritis. Somebody had asked about that. What do you have for arthritis in the YouTube chat? For decalcifying parts of your body, right? Getting rid of calcium deposits. Some people say it's good for the pineal gland, but it's also for lupus and some other really interesting things. And the main ingredient is quinine, right? And the best way to acquire quinine in nature or in our food supply is through grapefruit rinds. And if you take grapefruit rinds, take the grapefruit out of it, and then just not boil, you just simmer the rinds in like simmering water for a couple hours. That water is full of quinine. You add a little bit of honey to it, and you take that a couple times a day, and then you're getting more than your daily dose of quinine. And that's been, I think, scientifically proven to help prevent viruses. I don't know specifically about COVID, but there's been a lot on the internets about all of that. So there's another interesting do-it-yourself kind of, I don't want to say cure, but you know.
There's a lot of them out there that are like that. Like there's all sorts of different, like if you got to do your research though, because there's so many different substances and herbs and naturally occurring fruits and vegetables that have so many different effects. And if you really delve into it, you can go very, very deep into it.
Yeah. And they can interfere with other things you're taking, which is why you need to take responsibility for your health and know what you're already putting in your body, so you don't accidentally put something else in there. I was going to say on the arthritis thing, research DMSO, which is not approved for human use, but it is used as an anti-inflammatory in livestock. And the thing about it is so I probably can tell this story. So I had a terrible sprain on my ankle from CrossFit, and my ankle was as big as probably half a basketball. And I put DMSO on it because I decided to see if this really worked, and it was ankle sized by the morning. But the thing about DMSO is it penetrates all the way through to your bone. So anything on your surface skin comes in. And I think that's why they're afraid to use it as a treatment. But at the same time, you know, if you paired it with something like, I don't know, comfrey or something, it's bringing that in, right? So if you have gasoline on your skin, you're bringing gasoline in. Maybe you don't want to do that. But it's really interesting when you start reading about that for arthritis and what that can mean. I'm not recommending anything, and I'm not calling it a cure, but it is something I've looked into as this thumb gets a little creaky.
The C word.
I have a creaky right thumb.
There's actually a MMS protocol where you add DMSO to it as
Mhm.
well, which is a solvent, right? Kind of similar, in the whole realm, like an industrial thing. But I've heard people have luck. I've used DMSO for like a really bad ant bite that was just like really, really itching. You just put a little
Yeah.
DMSO on, and it was fine. For the arthritis question, there's been studies that show CBD reverses certain types of arthritis. So that's really freaking cool. CBD is cannabidiol. It's not THC, but it's a cannabinoid like THC. Although instead of interacting with the CB1 receptor, which is in your brain, it interacts with the CB2 receptor, which is in your spleen, and it helps the body to reach a state of homeostasis. So if you have inflammation or pain, it helps send signals in the body, and the body helps to deal with that. And I sell CBD at Brave Botanicals. Somebody wants to go to mybravebotanicals.com. They can pick some up. People also find luck with kratom, with red kratums when it comes to chronic pain. People find all sorts of relief, back pain, arthritis, fibromyalgia, all sorts of stuff like that. I'm not a doctor. This is what my customers tell me, right? And the funny thing about that whole thing, the big no-no words with the FDA is you can't say treat or cure a disease. And the way that they just completely broaden that is if you speak about anything that stems from a disease, like pain or trouble sleeping, that could be tied to some disorder or whatever, or the pain could be tied to the arthritis. And you can't even, when you start to bring that whole world up, and it's not an approved remedy, then you could get into trouble. But I like to share stories that people have. So we also sell the kratom. It's red kratom that a lot of people have luck with in that regard. And I did create a coupon code because I had a feeling kratom would come up. Not that I would insert it in there, but it's germane. But if people want to use unloose as the coupon code, then they can get 10% off on that. And you can always try a free ounce of kratom at freeounceofkratom.com.
I can't believe we didn't think about this earlier, but when Nicole, you had said something about it's useful for animals. Here's a gray area is if you get prescribed a medication and you don't have the money for healthcare or to pay thousands of dollars for whatever the medication is, like getting the animal, like fish medicine, right? I remember that was going around when we were prepping like a couple of years ago. It's like, if you need these medicines, you can get them from your local doctor, your veterinarian with no prescription, basically, at your fish food store or whatever. So, and it's the same exact medicine. They're just using it for different animals. So there's an interesting
fish antibiotics.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
no,
ketamine while you're at it too.
Yeah.
it's a great option.
And if you want to
gives
see how
fish
a market
ketamine?
works in medicine, you can still see it in action at a veterinary's office.
Yeah, it's closer to.
They're starting to get more insurance based now, and that whole layer of insurance messes everything up.
Yeah.
And
like
it's coming into the
perverse
vets now.
incentives.
But you think about every animal you've had treated and your experience there, and how you're somehow magically able to walk out the door with a bill.
Yeah.
Even if they've been on an IV and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah, and it's somewhat reasonable.
But we can't do that for humans because that's too hard.
I think maybe like one thing that we haven't touched on so far that we probably should just at least hit briefly is like this whole concept of like antibiotics and how we use them in modern society, because we totally overuse antibiotics, and we get so much antibiotics just from the farmers and the ranchers that put it into cows and chickens and stuff like that to prevent the herd from getting sick, and then we eat those animals, and then at the slightest sign of being sick, we get prescribed antibiotics. So eventually humans are going to develop a resistance to antibiotics, and we're going to enter what's known as like the post-antibiotic period, which really sounds like a nightmare. I mean, could you imagine if there was no antibiotics available to you, or if they didn't work, there's no effective antibiotics, and you're old and you're sick? I mean, you're screwed. So it's really important that people take it in the proper way. They don't overuse or abuse antibiotics.
Or underuse it.
Right, true.
Doctors like to just throw out, like, you come in with something, they slap out some antibiotics. And there's even been instances, well, they'll just throw out 2 or 3, not even knowing which type of antibiotic is germane for whatever you have, not even necessarily knowing what you have. And
Right.
you make a great point about the overuse. It not only does it create the resistant strains of viruses or bacteria, but it also kills good bacteria in your body. And I like to when governments intervene in the market, they create all sorts of distortions. Same thing when you intervene in your own body and you throw off the natural gut microbiome. That's a very beautiful thing. When it's allowed to flourish, it really takes good care of you. And a lot of our immune system is in our gut, most of our immune system. So yeah, definitely there's a time and a place for it, but unless you're in that place, try to keep it natural the best as you can. Colloidal silver is an antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial, and there's all sorts of studies and research on that as well. That's a good alternative to.
But it'll turn you
antibiotics.
colors.
The blue man, the gray
The
man.
blue man, yeah.
I've seen blue men before from.
It
colloidal
can.
silver. Yeah.
Yeah, the Smurf man. I have a sanitizer coming in from overseas, the Balkans area, that in their country has been proven to last on surfaces for 60 days and kill every virus, right? And for 60 days. And that, I think, will revolutionize the market here in the United States. I mean, imagine the amount of scrubbing and cleaning that people are going to do at schools and hospitals every night, and being able to have a sanitizer that would be able to last for even 30 days, right? But this one lasts 60. So I'll probably announce that someday, in the near future here. But there are a lot of really interesting solutions out there. You just have to think for yourself, trust your research, do some research, have more than, room temperature IQ, and be able to research, look at things and figure out what will work, what won't work.
Think for
Well,
yourself.
I think it's also an attitude. Just because a doctor says take this medicine,
Dude,
you need to ask more questions, first of all. And
Yeah.
secondly, you need to do some more research to see what the result of that is.
Uh-oh.
Because it's very easy to get in a situation, especially if you have a complicated problem, that you're seeing more than one specialist. They haven't really come up with a comprehensive approach. And next thing you know, you're taking 20 drugs, some of which might conflict with each other. I think the hardest part about our healthcare system at this point is that you have to run it. And you're not the expert necessarily. I mean, I'm the expert on my body at this point, but to Sal's point, I'm going to a doctor when I go to a doctor because it got out of my realm of what I can take care of.
right, exactly. I mean, it's the same with lawyering, right? If you have some kind of issue and you need legal representation, to just sit there and be like, I trust my lawyer, like that then you're not taking part in your own litigation or in defending yourself or prosecuting somebody for doing something wrong against you. It's like you have to have that accountability for your own life. You can't pass that on to others. The more you do that, the more you get into a statist sort of totalitarian system. And I think everybody wants like an easy solution or somebody else to take care of things for them, and that's just not how life works.
Yeah, that's good.
Also, I think agorism and entrepreneurship are really heavily intertwined. So try to think with almost like a business mindset, right? What if you have a great idea that relates to health or something like that? Bring it to market, see what happens. It's not always easy. Like I do a lot of e-commerce, and one of the things when this whole coronavirus crap went down was I decided I was going to start selling those UV sanitizer lights on Amazon because people. It works really well.
Yeah.
It has like over 99% effective rate to killing coronavirus, but you can't say that because you'll go to jail, right? And it ended up being such a disaster because the EPA considers these things pesticide devices that I couldn't even import them. So I abandoned that whole business plan right off the bat. But it just goes to show you how difficult they make the provision of healthcare products and services and devices to the average consumer. And that, of course, just drives up the costs of other similar products and whatnot.
Yeah. I can't
But
even take
if
credit
you want
card
it, you can find it. That's the other thing.
Yeah, if there's a will,
Like
there's
if
a
you
way.
figure out there's a thing you need to get and it is not legal to get it, if you decide to find it, you can get it.
There's
It's
some
legal somewhere.
who's trying to get it to you.
Or
know a
there
guy.
are people growing flowers that are called poppies all over your county.
They're called.
What you do with the poppy after you get it, it's up to you.
They're called soldiers.
Mhm.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I like how you were saying that, Xavier, don't give up that responsibility. And I like to encourage people to at least have a baseline level of knowledge when it comes to how your car works, when it comes to how your body works, when it comes to how the law works. Then when you bring on the expert, you at least know the language that they're speaking, know what they're talking about, and you can tell when they're not pulling a fast one on you. So
Yeah.
it's good to kind of be a Renaissance man in a variety of things, where at least you have that base knowledge where you can keep up with what's going on. You can make sure you're not getting taken for a ride, and you can help steer the ship the way where you want it to go.
Also, like any expert that you do choose, or any professional for anything, right, for healthcare or for your car, they should sort of coincide with your values, with what you're trying to accomplish. So if you don't believe in Western medicine, then don't go see a Western doctor. See an expert in naturopathy or something like that.
Acupuncture, whatever.
Right.
As
Because
long as
there
they
is
have
a
a permit.
Yeah, as long as they have a permit, given to them by the government. If there is such a marketplace of ideas, and there is such a marketplace of options and opportunities for the agorist looking to get proper health care. We talked about uh, travel, right? Being able to do, going to Vietnam or Taiwan, or going to Mexico, medical tourism, they call it. There's private healthcare groups. There's memberships that you can join for lower cost medicines, though I don't know how effective that's going to be now. There's private care doctors that you pay directly, taking your medicine and your health into your own hands by researching healthy antivirals, and increasing your mineral intake while decreasing your food intake, like Nicole had talked about, growing your own food. So there's a number of ways that you can take your health into your own hands. And as an agorist, I guess I'm an agorist, like I've known the word, but like when Jack was like, "Hey, you want to be on this podcast?" I was like, "Yeah, let's talk some cool shit." This is like, this has been amazing. Like I'm talking with people, like-minded people who I feel, why isn't this the norm? Like I'm learning this episode basically, and I've kind of known it my whole life. I've always been sort of on the outside of the circle, but I thought that everybody was like me in this way, right? And that everybody thought for themselves. But like this whole year has been a clear indication that no, it's like people need to learn to take agency and not proxy their thinking or their decision making to somebody else simply because they have a degree. How many people do you know that have like drank their way through college? Like, would you want them being a doctor?
Dude, having your eyes open puts you in the minority position nowadays. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and then questioning anything, it's like, woo, we don't want critical thinking out
The
there.
status quo is blasphemous to question it.
Xavier, you made me think of something though, and that is taking ownership of your health and your health care is really hard in an environment where the healthcare providers themselves have so bought into whatever narrative and clusterfuck that they've built. And it is a cluster. I've watched it over the span of my life get more and more centralized and more difficult. And you'll say, well, why can't I pay you right now with cash?
Right.
Because, and then they have this reason that makes no sense to an actual person that has something to do with a coding center, right? And so when you are also sick, it is very hard to advocate for yourself. So I think it's also very important to know who it is and to have several people who can help you through a serious illness, advocate for yourself, and keep your principles moving forward so that you can get the care you need. Because if you just fall back on yourself and then you're undergoing some sort of physical thing that has your senses are not there, or you're in pain all the time. If you don't have that advocate, it's a lot harder to get through all of the like ridiculous science fiction-esque movie control sorts of things that are going on in our healthcare right now. Because one thing we didn't talk about tonight is how bad it is. And that's great because we all know how bad it is, but it is insane. It's like, it's double talk the whole time you're in certain situations or in hospitals. It's horrible. It's why I don't want to go to one.
It reminds me of Alan
that's right.
Dulles' quote for the CIA, and I don't know if I remember it exactly, but it's something like, "We will have succeeded as our mission as the CIA when everybody believes a lie, like whatever everybody believes is a lie."
Wow.
And
Success.
Yep.
Seems like they've done it.
And they really have to, and I think there is, you know, not to be all patriotic, because remember, I have not been a patriotic individual up until like March, basically, because like I've seen videos of General Flynn saying this is the last stand on earth, and it's in so many ways it like really is. Like we are the last country that has, you know, a lot of guns besides the Swiss, and we are and we have way more guns than the Swiss, and this spirit of like, we grow our own stuff, or we did. That's what the revolution was all about. We grow our own stuff. We want to determine ourselves. We don't want to pay taxes and have somebody else decide how we are supposed to conduct our affairs. And so that spirit of freedom is something that is like, I think in all of us, and then in the people who listen. And I think that, you know, if we don't actually stand up for it at some point, it goes away. We can only hide so long.
Yeah. I like you bringing up patriotism and stuff. And when I like back in my Ron Paul days, I thought I was a patriot and hoorah with
Right.
America. But those characteristics of some Americans, right? Not all Americans by any stretch. Those characteristics are part of Americana, right? And part of our heritage as Americans. The whole rugged individualist, overthrowing the British rule, self-sustaining agrarian, right? And that desire for independence to the point where we'll fight a revolution, or at least people 300 plus years ago will fight a revolution for that. I think that that is a beautiful thing. And I think that we can be patriots, or we can have an adherence to that essence, that phenomenon, right? And that can be separate from an adherence to the American flag, or to the United States government, you know? And that is a very beautiful thing. And I agree with you. My buddy Derek Bros, he's like, I don't have any hope for the US. He's moving to Mexico. He wants to build an intentional community down there. And I'm like, hold on, buddy, don't give up hope on us yet. I do think that there is that spark that still exists. But you know, maybe everyone, we got to redouble our efforts, 10x our efforts, because the fire is kind of flickering a little bit, but I feel positively optimistic still.
Well, we need to represent what we're doing in ways that we don't sound completely crazy.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't think this conversation is very crazy at all.
It isn't.
Yeah.
And some people will think it is.
Mm-hmm. They probably won't be listening, or they won't last.
Wait, you pay money for your health care? I've actually met people who have tooth problems that would cost maybe $1,500, $2,000 to fix. If they went to Mexico, it would probably be half that.
Right.
Haven't gotten them fixed for 10 or 15 years because they don't have dental insurance and they can't afford it.
Man.
Yeah.
$100 a month would have really gotten you in that direction quickly,
Right.
in about 12 months, or $50 in 2 years, whatever.
Yeah. And you end up, insurance itself is a ridiculous concept. I mean, you know,
dental insurance costs more than what you get from it anyway.
Exactly. And if you're literally paying to not be afraid, when you could just educate yourself and not be afraid.
Yeah.
Save some money.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on 9 o'clock. That means we've been rambling, ranting, and raving, not sounding crazy, sounding totally normal and coherent.
We didn't have any really good rants tonight. What's up with that?
I mean, I kind of went off a little bit on the whole
on
COVID
patriotism in America. Let's before we wrap up, let's ask, let me just see what y'all's outlook is on this whole vaccine rollout, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. I think it's going to be a pretty big deal how it all pans out. I think there's going to be more people that don't take the vaccine than the government probably anticipates. Trump has communicated that he'll use the military to roll it out. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but just real quick, give us some predictions, or what we should worry about, if anything. What do you think it's going to look like? Any last insights on that before we wrap up? Maybe Hawk, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Sal's about to say something. Go, Sal. Switching
Go,
notes.
Sal.
Go, Sal.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you know, I don't know. I just I think it's definitely coming. But see, I'm not a doctor. I was always under the impression that a vaccine, there was no cure for a virus, right? That was the whole problem with AIDS, right? Is that you can't cure a virus. You can only cure a bacterial infection, not a viral infection. So I must be misunderstanding something there, that about the way that they're going to cure a coronavirus. That seems like a really big medical breakthrough that should have much more attention paid to it. Unless, like I said, I'm misunderstanding something. But I will never be vaccinated. The government will never inject my living body with a foreign substance. And then that goes for anything. I don't even really believe in coronavirus. I know everybody has their own opinion, but I damn sure will never be injected by some politician. It'll be a cold day in hell.
Yeah.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. How do you really feel, Sal?
I am with Sal 100% on that. There is no way somebody is going to say you have to take an injection for a virus that has a mortality rate and a mortality rate under 0.00001%. Right? That's just ridiculous. So what my prediction is, though, is that they're going to try to roll it out on other parts of the world. You know, like in Australia, they're already talking about it. They're arresting people for posting on Facebook in Australia now, by the way. This is a Western country, or, you know, it's technically in the East, but it's a Western mentality, Western culture. And they have to comply because they have no guns, poor guys and gals. Whereas here in the United States, there's enough people that have woken up that it'll be civil war if they mandate it. You know, the federal government has not even mandated masks, right? This is all regional governments and regional governors and county level bullshit. And so what I see Trump doing is being like, we're going to have we're going to do everything that you expect to help take care of this so that we can appease your irrational fears, people of the United States, and so that the media doesn't say I'm a horrible person, because they're going to anyway, but like they would really go off the charts if that were the case. And he's going to make them available. And just like the Mercy and the Hope and the Javits Center, nobody's going to fucking use it. And he's not going to mandate it, but they're going to try to get it in like, you know, different ways, like you can't travel, or you can't go into business, or you can't go to school. And that's really at the regional level. And like, if you know, just to say, if people want to stop that, then get their governors out of the way, get their regional and county level, you know, rulers out of the way.
Yeah. What do you think, Nicole?
I think it's a test run. I think this whole thing is a test run to see how far they can go. I think a lot of learning is happening right now, and this is not the big takeover that everybody has feared. And the vaccine. So I'm going back to liberty on this one. So what we've been watching happen to personal freedom is that they chip away a little bit at it, and they try to go further, and then that doesn't work, so they run back, and then they chip away a little bit more of it because it seems more reasonable. It's the concept, the Overton window concept. We've been watching that happen for a long time, and this vaccine concept, I think, is just another way to chip away at the liberties. So they're making us all scared that they're going to mandate it, and they may try to put on the local level some controls in, like you can't go to public schools if you don't have it. They do that with other vaccines already, right? They already know they can do that. I saw somebody on YouTube say they'll force military to take it. Yeah, that you can't say no, right? You've signed your life away at that point. But it's still a test run. I don't think they're ready to go big, but they're going to learn from our reaction. And the more people who don't take it and who demand to be free anyway, the better off we are, because they can't push into our personal liberties as far.
Right on.
What about you, John?
Well, I think that as far as Trump goes, I have kind of appreciated Trump's approach to all of this stuff. I'm not a big Trump guy, but I appreciated how he was more hands off. And like you said, it was like 15 days to slow the spread. You guys take responsibility. And remember when everyone was like, there's going to be a nationwide lockdown? I heard it from my cousin's sister's neighbor that works with FEMA. And
you have to have papers.
Security guy. That never happened, of course. And I knew people were saying that when Trump was already under the 15 days to slow the spread. So he wouldn't want to get called out at a press conference. Like, I thought it was 15 days to slow the spread. So I'm not worried about the federal approach as much as the local and state, especially in liberal Democrat controlled cities where they have no problems overreaching on your rights. And I do think that there's going to be a privilege kind of deal, taking away privileges like travel, entering this particular store. They did it with Real ID Act when they forced compliance with the Real ID, which is like a national ID that has this common biometric schema.
Yeah.
And they said the states that don't comply, or the people that don't comply by X date, can't fly and can't access federal buildings. I don't know why you would want to access a federal building in the first place, because if you have a federal trial, but so I think that they might try to roll something out like that. But I think Nicole is right in that the more people that resist, the better it is for our cause, for the skeptics out there and the critical thinkers.
Yeah.
But I think they're just going to continue to do the frog in the boiling pot mentality, which is another image that came to mind when Nicole was sharing her thoughts on it. But we just, we got to resist. And I think we'll wrap up there. I want to
Wait 1 second. To that end,
what do you got?
September 11th and September 15th, I've seen both of those days for Burn Your Mask days that are going to be nationwide Burn Your Mask protests, which is like, hell yeah. I mean, I've even seen like posts and people being like, I want them all back. I demand all my rights back. I want to be able to travel through an airport without having my wife and children groped and prodded and x-rayed. Like, I mean, people are starting to wake up.
A lot of people in mass. And there's this whole thing, like I know that you're a fan of some of the Q stuff, right, Xavier? There's this whole element where that is like a huge movement, and whether people subscribe to it or not, it's a lot of people that are questioning the government and doing, getting into some pretty deep kind of research. And
I mean, old biddies, like old little ladies are like talking to me about Q. And like, I'm watching, I'm not like, yeah, trust the plan and everything's going to work out fine. Like, I think that we're still in for a big, heavy kind of storm coming. And I just hope that that enough people are waking up, that they know what side of the fence that they're going to be on when things kind of fall apart. Because I still think things are going to fall apart to a big degree.
The man is like really tightening his grip, but at that same time, the more that he tightens it, the more it slips out. He's like squeezing us out, and they're just they overplayed their hand.
Seed.
That's right. This slippery goose.
That needs to be a t-shirt, Sal.
Thank you, Nicole, Sal, and Xavier. This has been a great edition of the Unloose the Goose podcast. I want to thank everyone that tuned in to us live and everyone that's listening on the podcast or after the matter on YouTube. Check out unloosethegoose.com. You can join our Telegram chat. There's links to the Facebook group. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. And I want to shout out again, I think it was Melissa and some other folks are putting together the show notes and going through the old podcast and gathering up all that stuff. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And I'm going to end it on a quote from Michael Badnerick regarding mandatory vaccines. He says, if you want to force me to take a vaccine, you bring the syringe and I'll bring my 45 and we'll see which one leaves a bigger hole.
Like that.
Thanks. Peace, guys.